Without ceiling insulation, 30% of your home's heat can be lost through your roof, especially in a lot of the older houses we have in New Zealand. Installing ceiling insulation will help keep your house warmer in winter and cooler in summer. It can also help reduce your power bills. I'll show you how to install ceiling insulation yourself, easy as. Before you get into it, it's a good idea to get an electrician to check the condition of your wiring. It's also a great opportunity to upgrade any lighting to LEDs. You'll also want to check for any leaking pipes and make sure you get any repairs done prior to starting. And familiarise yourself with NZS 4246, installing insulation in residential buildings. You can find this online. Now, because you're working close to wires, you'll need to turn the power off at the mains and use a work light or a torch. As far as safety gear goes, it all depends on the product you're using. So always check the instructions on the pack. There's a number of products to choose from. I'm going with Bradford Gold, which is a glass wool option. Depending on what part of the country you live in will determine which R value you use. The R value is simply a measure of the insulation's effectiveness and needs to be higher in the colder areas. The New Zealand Building Code does specify a minimum R value for ceilings, and your local store will stock the correct one for your area. Now, obviously, we are working in a studio environment. Now, whether you got a new house or an old house, the installation method is exactly the same. So before we crack into it, there's a couple of things we need to do first. One, work out how much product we need and the width of that product. So I've got an area of 4.8 by 4.8, which gives me a total of 23.04 square meters. Now, this particular bag here covers 7.8 square meters, so that works out to 3 bags. So the second thing we need to work out is the width of the product. So that's the distance in between our joists. So I've got a distance of 400 millimeters in between my joists. So that means I'm using a 430 millimeter wide insulation product. Now, safety wise, I've got myself a suit on, gloves, mask, goggles, a knife, a kneeling board, rubber sole shoes, tape measure, and also handy little tool here, which is an insulation poker. Now that's going to help us get into those really tight areas. Okay, now I'm just about to rip into it. Now, the golden rule when installing your ceiling insulation, start from your furthest point and work back towards your manhole. So, a couple of things. I need to measure the distance in between my joists, allow another 5 to 10 millimeters wider so we can get a nice tight friction fit in there. Got my headlight torch on there, which is going to be nice and handy. Got my kneeling board, so I can also cut on that as well. So, first things first, have a measure up. Now, I've got 400 millimeters exactly, so I'm going to make that 410. So we're just going to slide that in. Now, I'm just going to use my little insulation poker. I've got a little screw sticking in out of there. So I'm just going to use that to get that nice and tight right down that far end. That's sitting in there absolutely beautifully. Nice friction fit.
Then continue with the next segment.
Okay, now if you're in the situation that your roof space at home is quite low and your area down the end there is very, very small and you can't get your insulation in, what you can do, take your knife and just slice off a little bit, maybe a third of the way through, whatever you need to get that underneath your rafters.
Make sure when you're moving around the space to only stand on the joists or kneeling board, not the ceiling itself.
Okay, so I've got myself a downlight here that's coming through the ceiling. You will need to leave a clear space around the light. So what I'm going to do is just measure from my last piece of insulation up to the middle of that light, and that's where our butt joint is going to be. We're going to cut a semicircle around that light. Now, even though you have turned off the power, just treat all wiring as live anyway. That's the centre. Now, if I had a transformer off the back of that light, I'd sit that on top of the insulation, but in our case we don't. So my next piece, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to tuck it underneath the wiring here. So we'll just very gently tuck that underneath our wire, put that up against our other piece of insulation. That's looking really good. Make sure we've got nothing touching the light. Carry on. So when it comes up to the situation where you've got a wire up against the joist like that, all we do is just push our insulation nice and tidy up against it. Nice and easy. Rightio, so where you've got any small spaces like over here, just use up all your offcuts for those. Once again, just make sure you're making it 10 mils bigger all round.
Insulate from wall to wall, making sure there are no gaps, folds or compressions as you go.
Lastly, you want to cut a piece of insulation the same size as your manhole and just glue that on nice and tight. And of course, make sure you gather up all your tools before you leave and just have a tidy up of any other little bits left over. That's the job done. You won't believe the difference it'll make in your home. It'll be warmer, drier and healthier. And if you like what you've seen, subscribe to the Mitre 10 YouTube channel for more handy content, or click here to watch some now.